Welcome. You're listening to the Uncharted Lancaster Podcast, where we explore the hidden histories, forgotten places, and long-buried secrets of Lancaster County. Using modern digital storytelling tools, each episode brings a new piece of local lore to life, revealing the strange, the surprising, and the stories history left behind. Let's begin.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We've got a stack of sources today that detail a life lived so far outside the lines of convention, it actually became a celebrity attraction.
It really did.
We are heading into the steep, wooded River Hills region of southern Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, to uncover the story of a man who achieved local fame, not despite being a recluse, but, well, precisely because he was one.
We're tracking the life, the enduring mystery, and the pretty profound legacy of Colonel John Mead. He was a constant figure in the area for decades, known intimately by railroad crews, local farmers, and this is the fascinating part, by the Victorian high society that flocked to the area.
And they all knew him by this incredible title, one he gave himself.
His self-appointed, totally contradictory title, the Gentleman Bum.
That title is really the heart of this whole deep dive, isn't it? Our sources, they paint this picture of a man who was undeniably educated, articulate, deeply read, and meticulously courteous.
Oh, absolutely.
And yet, he chose to spend the last 25 years of his life sleeping on a board in these crude rock shelters along the Susquehanna River. So the question is, how do you maintain the manners of a gentleman while living the life of, well, a vagabond? That's what we really need to unpack.
Exactly. And our source material for this is just so rich. We have decades of newspaper clippings and historical accounts, but they're juxtaposed against brand new, almost forensic investigative findings from just last year.
So it's a mix of old history and new discovery.
It is. So our mission for you, the listener, is really twofold. First, we need to trace Mead's mysterious path. From his secretive origins to the surprisingly prominent social salon he basically ran from his primitive cave.
A salon from a cave. I love that.
And second, we're going to follow the incredible, successful modern search for his long-lost home, a place called House Rock, which was definitively located just last year in 2023.
And that modern breakthrough is what truly anchors this history in the present, right? We're talking about explorers stepping into a site that had been, lost for over 100 years?
106 years, to be precise. It's a fantastic convergence of history and technology. In the autumn of 2023, you have these four local explorers, Luis Alejandro, Ryan of Hiker Dad Dude, Brett of Topo Ranger, and Cole Swanger. And they set out to solve this century-old puzzle.
And they weren't just guessing, they had a methodology.
A very clear one. Yeah. They didn't just rely on folklore. They used meticulous local research, the only known historical photograph of Mead in his shelter, and modern geospatial technology.
So when you say geospatial technology, you mean LiDAR, right?
Exactly. LiDAR, or light detection and ranging, which they used to essentially cut through the dense forest canopy. They were looking for the subtle signature of human habitation, not just, a big cave entrance.
And they found it.
They succeeded spectacularly. After decades of local resident searching, they found and verified the actual House Rock shelter. Its reported GPS location is 39.86967, NATMIT 76.36543. What they found wasn't just a hole in the ground, but a verified historical landmark tied to this profoundly eccentric yet pivotal local figure.
That is a phenomenal starting point. So let's start with the man who made himself famous by trying to disappear. Let's unpack this.
The primary challenge in discussing John Mead, and you see this in every source, is that he was a deliberately constructed enigma. He built a wall around his past.
So John Mead itself, that was probably fake.
Almost certainly an assumed name. He was a man who, for reasons he would never, ever divulge, chose to just erase his past completely.
And he kept that secret right up to the very end. But despite his silence, some threads of his past were pulled together by friends and acquaintances, right?
What do we know about the man before he became the Gentleman Bum?
We know a few key things. First, he was a native of Maine. That seems pretty solid. And critically, we know that as a young man, he worked for his father.
Okay.
And his father was involved in manufacturing goods for the U.S. government. It's a crucial piece of context because it suggests he didn't come from utter destitution. He came from a background of industry, probably some education, and potentially some social standing. So his choice to live as a hermit was a radical downward mobility. It was a deliberate rejection of the middle class or professional path he was likely set on.
A total rejection.
Yeah.
And that background makes his refusal to share his history all the more compelling, He would typically avoid any personal questions, never gave a direct reason for his self-imposed isolation, and essentially forced the world to accept him based solely on his present actions and demeanor.
And with no information, people they start to fill in the blanks themselves.
Exactly. That void of information immediately led to speculation, which in turn led to the development of his titles, Colonel and the gentleman bum persona.
Let's talk about Colonel. Where did that come from? Was there any military record?
None. The Colonel prefix is entirely unsubstantiated in official records. It was a local honorific, an acknowledgement from the community that he carried himself with an authority or a dignity that was, it was far beyond his circumstances.
But his closest friends, the ones who spent real time with him, they had a specific theory that adds this layer of deep psychological context.
They did. They strongly believed he was a veteran, possibly of the Civil War, just given the timing of his life. And this is where modern historical interpretation steps in. The working theory is that his hermit lifestyle was a direct result of profound trauma, what we would now immediately recognize as PTSD.
And if you entertain that idea for just a moment, it explains so much about his peculiarities, doesn't it?
It really does.
A veteran dealing with trauma might seek absolute solitude, the hard discipline of a Spartan life, a complete rejection of domestic comfort. He'd be trading the constant unpredictability of a conventional society for the predictable discipline of the wilderness.
It certainly fits his behaviors. This whole notion of self-imposed poverty as a coping mechanism rather than a failure of will. But the title he really embraced, the one that defined his public interaction, was the gentleman bum.
An economic description paired with a social standard.
That's it, exactly. He was telling you what he was, but also what he wasn't.
And the gentleman side was backed up by some serious intellectual substance. I mean, he was reportedly brilliant, exceptionally well-educated, and the sources claim he was quite the linguist. He wasn't just surviving out there, he was reading deeply, constantly.
And just think about the logistics of that for a second. Maintaining a habit of constant reading in a rock shelter in the 1890s. This required an impressive and reliable supply chain.
Which was provided by the very force of industrial progress he was trying to escape, the railroad.
Precisely. The railroad workers, either out of respect or curiosity or just routine, would literally toss books and newspapers from passing trains directly to him.
A constant supply of current events, politics, literature, all delivered right to his doorstep. So he rejected society, but not its output. He stayed informed.
Which, as we'll discuss later, was absolutely key to his status as a social attraction. He could engage in a serious philosophical debate with a wealthy tourist from Philadelphia because of those tossed newspapers.
It was a perfect contained system, really.
It was. He received intellectual sustenance from the trains, and in exchange, he gave the passing railroad crews a story, a face, and a local landmark.
But let's go back to him living outside society's rules. The key was maintaining dignity. He defied that stereotypical image of a tramp or a hobo.
That was his brand. He maintained incredibly demanding standards for himself. He was always clean, his living area was tidy, and he was exceptionally courteous. If you were approaching John Mead's rock shelter, you were dealing with a host, not an unfortunate vagrant.
He never allowed his external circumstances, the poverty, the dirt, the primitive conditions, to erode his internal discipline or his social grace.
Not at all. And his work ethic was a direct reflection of that dignity. He didn't just accept handouts. When he occasionally worked for local farmers, he accepted a meal only on the condition of reciprocal labor.
And he would introduce himself in these exchanges as the gentleman bum, right? He owned the title.
He did. It was his way of preserving his honor. He could accept charity, but only if it was redefined as payment for services rendered. This reinforces that interpretation, that his poverty was a choice, not a necessity. He was negotiating his terms with the outside world on his own terms.
And he had these fascinating non-negotiable peculiarities. One detail that really sticks out in the source material is his absolute refusal to sleep in a bed.
Yes. Even when he was offered warm accommodation by generous employers, he always declined.
It speaks to a deep, perhaps institutionalized discomfort with conventional domesticity. Was it a loyalty to the hard life he had chosen? Was it a lingering element of military discipline, maybe?
We can only speculate, but it was a hard and fast rule. He chose the hard board over the soft mattress every single time. It was part of the uniform, so to speak.
And he wasn't always just fixed in the river hills, right? We see a kind of migratory pattern that highlights his independence.
Right, he was a seasonal traveler. Every spring he would journey, and it was a significant journey, all the way to New Jersey.
New Jersey? Oh, there.
He would work specifically on vegetable farms. So this wasn't merely a move for better weather. It was a deliberate shift into a different, but still very demanding, form of manual labor. Then he'd return to his preferred environment in the Susquehanna Hills.
So he's using labor to maintain his independence from begging, demonstrating a consistent, structured work life, even when he was technically homeless.
He truly was a master of his own very specific, very personal economy.
So let's follow his movements geographically now. Let's focus on his dwellings, starting with the one that progress literally steamrolled.
Mead spent 2.5 decades moving between several of these rock shelters along the Susquehanna. His first verified location, the one we know for sure, was known locally as Middle Rock.
And can you place Middle Rock for us? It was near what landmark?
It was situated about 1 mile east of the Martic Forge. This area of the River Hills, even back then, was already connected to the industrial movement of the region.
But that connection proved fatal to his dwelling.
Exactly. His time there was cut short by the construction of a massive infrastructure project. We're talking about the Pennsylvania Railroad's Enola low-grade line in 1903.
This wasn't just a minor track adjustment. This was a major undertaking that physically reshaped the entire landscape.
Oh, it was huge. The construction of the low-grade line, which was a major industrial project to haul coal and freight more efficiently, physically displaced him. He was literally forced out of his home by the expansion of the modern industrial world.
The same world he relied on for his books. The irony is just incredible.
That's a profound irony. That displacement, though, led him to relocate to the site of his greatest fame, the place that was ultimately rediscovered in 2023, House Rock.
House Rock. This became his prime location.
It did. He settled there along the corridor of another crucial rail line, the Columbia and Port Deposit Railroad, or what the locals just called the Port Road. This location provided all the necessities: the solitude of the river hills, the material goods dropped by the trains, and, crucially, proximity to the resort town of Pequea.
Now, when we hear rock shelter, I think we often picture just a shallow overhang, something temporary. But Mead's dwelling at House Rock was highly customized and, in its own way, really architectural. He created a kind of hybrid structure.
He absolutely did. He invested significant time and effort into making it functional and defensible against the elements. The rock shelter itself formed the back and the roof, but he reinforced the entrance. He placed timber all around the opening.
So he's building a wall.
He's essentially creating a cabin built directly against the stone face. It was a deliberate, weather-tight structure. This was a permanent home for him, not some transient camp.
And the details of his internal setup, as they've been gathered from the sources, are so telling about his chosen Spartan discipline. What did his home look like on the inside?
His interior was the absolute epitome of austerity. His bed, as we mentioned, was just a longboard, covered only by a thin sheet, no mattress, no soft linens, even when he probably could have acquired them through gifts from his many visitors.
That refusal of comfort, again, is such a consistent psychological element of his life.
It is. And his kitchen was similarly stripped down to maximum efficiency.
No fancy cookware, I'm guessing?
Not at all. His cook stove was primitive, but entirely functional. A half-dozen bricks arranged to form a firebox and then topped with a large iron plate. That was it. That was all he needed to prepare his simple daily meals.
And what fueled the gentleman bum? How did he maintain his supplies without drawing a lot of attention to his movements?
Well, his daily sustenance was incredibly pragmatic. We're talking canned goods, fish he caught from the river, dry bread, and ample coffee. Coffee was a big one.
And for heat, for the stove.
For energy and heat, he was self-sufficient. He sourced his wood by cutting it from the surrounding woods, which was a daily necessity, another form of demanding labor for him. And crucially, he sourced coal.
Where did he get coal?
He would pick it up along the railroad tracks, dropped by the passing train.
Wait, so the trains were literally dropping his fuel source.
They were dropping his reading material and his fuel source. Both were necessities for him to maintain his specific kind of isolated intellectual life. The coal provided long-lasting heat for the stove, allowing him to stay warm through those brutal Pennsylvania winters, relying entirely on the industrial detritus of the world right outside his door.
It was a perfectly efficient, self-contained, and remarkably simple economy he had built for himself.
Absolutely.
It paints this picture of isolation that was strategically placed right next to the busiest thoroughfare of its time. But the most significant function of House Rock wasn't just to house Mead. It was to host his visitors. This is the true contradiction of his life.
This is where we have to understand the regional context, because the question is, why did hundreds of people, many of them incredibly wealthy and sophisticated, make a pilgrimage to a man's rock shelter?
And the answer is Peckway.
The answer is Peckway. Today, Peckway is a quiet little river town, but before the collapse brought on by the Great Depression, it was a massive high society tourist destination.
It was the place to be on the Susquehanna.
Without a doubt. The town was home to the magnificent Riverview Hotel, which was drawing tourists from incredible distances. Baltimore, Philadelphia, Chicago, and we even have records of wealthy travelers coming from Europe. They were coming for the scenery, the clean air, and the social scene.
So this was not some rural, quiet retreat. This was a fashionable hub where high-profile figures were known to vacation.
Absolutely. I mean, the guest list reads like a history book.
Yeah.
We have specific celebrity visitors mentioned, including President Calvin Coolidge, who visited the area, and the legendary boxing champion Jack Dempsey.
Wow.
So imagine this level of opulence and celebrity. And then within walking distance, there was a philosopher living under a rock. Mead location was entirely central to this elite social scene.
That gives the contrast some real texture. So how did a man who actively rejected society become a fixed point on the tourist itinerary for people staying at a hotel frequented by presidents?
Well, travelers were drawn by pure curiosity, and also the promise of encountering something exotic but safe. The same railroad workers who supplied him with newspapers also supplied information about him to the hotel staff and the local carriage drivers.
So he was being marketed in a way?
He was part of the local tour package. Vacationers from the Riverview Hotel came by the dozens, sometimes hundreds annually. Mead was readily accessible, and critically, he was always ready to receive company.
But wait, if he was truly a recluse, why would he spend time delighting visitors? Doesn't the very act of entertaining hundreds of people fundamentally contradict the label hermit?
That is the central intellectual friction of his life. You've nailed it. He wasn't a spiritual recluse seeking religious isolation. He was a social recluse. He was seeking isolation from responsibility and conventional life.
So he still craved connection, just on his own terms.
He still required intellectual stimulation and, I think, the validation of recognition. He chose to live outside the financial and domestic constraints of society, but he still needed an audience.
So he essentially ran a salon. He was the intellectual centerpiece of the hills.
Precisely. And his role as host was defined by his extraordinary conversational skills. He would engage in serious discussion on the topics of the day, politics, current events, philosophy. The guests weren't talking to a simple vagrant. They were speaking to an educated mind who just happened to wear rags.
And that allowed him to project this incredible dignity despite his abject poverty.
It did. He was offering the wealthy vacationer a kind of intellectual slumming. They could escape the stuffiness of the hotel for an hour, converse deeply about the meaning of life with a man who had successfully opted out, and then return to their three-course dinner.
He satisfied that Victorian fascination with the romantic hermit, the noble savage who chooses nature over civilization.
He was a living philosophical artifact, and he even added props to his persona. The sources note he would delight in showing visitors photographs taken of him in the company of the fairer sex.
No way. So he was actively marketing the mystery of his past romantic life.
Absolutely. It added to the intrigue. Here's a man who obviously had a history with high society, who had loved and been loved, yet he chose this desolate existence. It fueled speculation and guaranteed repeat visits.
And he also curated a kind of private rock shelter museum. He had this extensive collection of Native American relics.
He did, and this collection served two very important functions. First, it was a talking point, an object of curiosity for his visitors. But second, it connected him physically to the land and the history of the region.
How did he claim he got them?
He claimed some relics were received through association with indigenous groups, and that others he had found near his cave home. Now, whether these claims were true or exaggerated, the collection helped establish his deep, almost spiritual connection to the river hills.
His entire existence was a masterful exercise in dignified self-marketing. He was the experience that confirmed the vacationer's sense of cultural breadth.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the crucial financial mechanism of the gentleman bum. He needed funds to buy supplies at the Eshelman store in Peckway, but he had to maintain his dignity to maintain his image.
And the sources outline a very specific financial code for him.
A very specific code. He would always accept a gift of money, but he would never ask for any.
And that distinction is everything.
It is paramount. Asking for money defines you as a beggar. Accepting a gift defines the transaction as respect, a tribute paid to a famous, unique local figure. By accepting the gifts, he maintained his supply chain, ensuring he could purchase the necessary food, coal, and wood that he couldn't acquire through labor or railroad discards.
And we know he was a regular paying customer at the Eshelman store in Peckway.
He was completely integrated into the commercial rhythm of the town, just on his own terms. He would occasionally disappear for a few days, presumably to work or gather supplies, and then he'd return with what he needed. His financial conduct was as particular and as principled as his refusal to sleep in a bed.
He lived outside the system, but maintained this constant negotiated border with it.
That's a great way to put it.
That time at House Rock really defined his identity. He lived there for well over a decade, entertaining hundreds of people. But as we mentioned earlier, that iconic chapter was abruptly closed by a natural disaster.
Right, but before we delve into the fire, we really need to stress how vital the modern research was in correcting some historical inaccuracies here.
Okay, what was the old story?
Early accounts, including some initial published research on Mead, suggested he moved around 1907. The story was that he was forced out due to the widening of the Port Road.
So another story of progress pushing him out.
Exactly. But that entire timeline was revised just recently, thanks to the diligence of some researchers, specifically the Susquehanna Ramblers and a man named Dennis Brooks.
And what did Brooks find?
Brooks made a critical archival discovery at the York County History Center. He found a specific photograph of Mead in his House Rock home, and it was clearly dated August 18, 1911.
So why does one photo trump a historical consensus?
Because it's irrefutable photographic evidence. It proves he was living there 4 years after the widely accepted move date. That single image allowed the researchers to just discard the old faulty assumptions and start tracking the real story of his final years.
So we have a new confirmed date for his final move?
A much later one. The actual event that forced him to move was on March 6, 1915.
And it wasn't human progress this time.
No, it was nature. A devastating 40-acre forest fire swept through the area, and it engulfed and completely destroyed his carefully constructed House Rock shelter.
Oh, wow. Imagine the emotional and material devastation of that. 12 years of construction, all of his carefully collected relics, all of those photos of the fairer sex he used to entertain guests.
All of it. Likely all gone in the blaze. It must have been a profound loss of his entire identity kit.
The fire wiped out his home and his archives.
It did. And just for some context on the scale of land ownership in the area, the land he occupied even after the move was owned by Paul Hine.
Paul Hine, who was he?
He was a significant local figure. He was the builder and owner of the Grand Hotel Brunswick in downtown Lancaster, PA. So even though Mead was technically a squatter, he was a squatter whose existence was tolerated and even celebrated by the local elite.
So, forced out by the blaze, Mead makes his final temporary move to a new location, a place called Observation Rock.
That's right. Observation Rock was located about 1.5 miles south of Peckway along the Port Road, and it was a spectacular spot chosen for its commanding geographical position.
So describe that final view for us. What was he looking at?
His new home was situated beneath one of the highest rocks along the Lancaster County shore of the Susquehanna River. The view was panoramic. It offered magnificent sweeping perspectives of the surrounding countryside and the river below. It was arguably his most visually impressive location.
And even after the trauma of the fire, the loss of all his possessions, and the exhaustion of having to rebuild at his age, he immediately recommenced his duties as the social host.
He did, despite his advancing age and, by then, deteriorating health. The sources tell us he continued to entertain visitors. He'd walk about the premises, leveraging the incredible view to explain the work of nature in distant places. He maintained the character, the articulate philosopher in rags, right up until the very end.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the hard life that he chose finally caught up to him. His time at Observation Rock was tragically brief.
Only about 18 months. His health failed rapidly.
He was admitted to the county hospital on August 27, 1916. What was the diagnosis?
The medical reports indicate it was complications stemming from an earlier surgery he had undergone for cancer removal, and he was 75 years old by this point.
And that was his final dwelling. After decades of fiercely guarding his independence out in the wilderness, he died 5 months later.
On January 10, 1917, he passed away while still a resident of the hospital. A man who had entertained hundreds of people annually, whose life was a central point of interest for local society and visiting dignitaries, met a profoundly solitary end.
And that is the ultimate heart-wrenching irony of John Mead's life, isn't it? Despite his widespread fame, his body remained unclaimed after his death.
It's a tragic footnote to an otherwise defiant life. The gentleman bum, who was known to everyone, was ultimately claimed by no one. He was buried anonymously in the Almshouse Cemetery.
And his story and the physical location of his famous home were then just lost to history.
Literally and figuratively buried, until the perfect convergence of modern circumstances brought him back to light.
Right, and that revival starts in a very modern, very relatable way.
It does. The initial spark for Mead's revival began in a situation I think many of us shared, the extreme boredom and curiosity bred by the global shutdown of March 2020.
The ultimate pandemic rabbit hole. That's when Adam Zern, confined to his home, stumbles upon Mead's obituary while diving deep into the history and newspaper section of the Conestoga Area Historical Society website.
It's amazing how necessity drives discovery, isn't it? That initial online research allowed Zern to track down the original January 13th, 1917 Lancaster Examiner article confirming the details of Mead's death. This published research injected new vitality into the historical community.
So the story resurfaces in 2020, but the physical search that required the key that Dennis Brooks and the Susquehanna Ramblers found in 2023, the critical photograph.
That photograph, the one found at the York County History Center, was the Rosetta Stone for this whole search. It wasn't just proof of his timeline, it provided the visual cues necessary for the search.
What do you mean by visual cues?
Well, it showed specific rock formations, the layout of his timber structure, and the view lines. They needed all of that to compare the historical image with modern geography.
And this is where the old-school historical detective work married modern technology. The research gave them a broad search area, but finding a tiny overgrown rock shelter in the thick canopy of the river hills, that requires something more precise.
That's where the four modern explorers came in. Luis Alejandro, Ryan, Brett, who goes by Topo Ranger, and Cole Swanger. They used the search area suggested by the Ramblers, and then they dramatically narrowed the field using modern LIDAR scans.
For those of you who might be unfamiliar, LIDAR works by firing rapid laser pulses at the ground from aircraft or drones. It measures the time the light takes to bounce back. And crucially, in dense forest areas like the Susquehanna Hills, it can penetrate the tree canopy.
And what they were looking for wasn't necessarily a massive cave entrance. They were looking for anomalies in the terrain's subtle signatures of human disturbance.
Like what?
Like a shallow shelf, or the flattened area where timber once lay, or just a slight change in grade caused by years of habitation against the rock face. The LIDAR point cloud revealed that faint century-old signature.
So they managed to filter out the noise of the wilderness and pinpoint the one place that matched the geometry of the photo and the historical accounts.
Which led to the triumphant rediscovery of House Rock in November 2023.
They located the shallow rock shelter and critically confirmed that it perfectly matched the structure shown in that 1911 photograph. After over a century of local lore and fruitless searches, they had achieved a verified physical location.
An incredible moment of discovery.
And their boots on the ground work confirmed the site was genuine. Did they find any specific artifacts related to Mead?
They certainly found evidence of long-ago habitation. The sources note they uncovered several historic items, possibly dating back to Mead's time.
Like what kind of items?
Small pieces of material culture, maybe a rusted can or some detritus related to his iron plate stove. Things that provide that direct, tangible connection to the man who left the area 106 years prior.
It's just extraordinary that this piece of history is now public and protected. What is the location like today for anyone who might want to visit?
House Rock is now located within the Pequea Conservancy's Clark Nature Preserve. It remains a beautiful, isolated spot overlooking the Susquehanna River. It's transitioned from a recluse's private dwelling to a documented, protected historical landmark that allows us to physically connect with this man and his unique life.
A pretty incredible journey from obscurity back into the light.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, John Mead is one of the great American examples of achieving fame through profound intentional contradiction. He wasn't famous despite being a hermit. He was famous because he was a gentleman hermit who refused to be defined by his circumstances. He mastered the art of being both completely private and publicly available.
He traded the comforts of conventional society for the intellectual freedom of the fringes. His rejection of norms was so thorough, yet his adherence to manners was so absolute, that he became an essential novelty for high society tourists, offering them a taste of the authentic philosophical fringe.
And his legacy is an enduring reminder that history resides not only in the grand movements of politics and war, but in the compelling, eccentric individuals who carve out their own space on the margins. His story resonates because it taps into our own curiosity about what it truly means to be free and what the cost of that freedom might be.
And the fact that we had to use sophisticated geospatial technology LIDAR to penetrate a century of overgrowth and locate the secrets he so carefully guarded. Well, that's a commentary on our own era, isn't it?
It is, a mystery that remained unsolved for decades until historians and explorers leveraged this perfect blend of 20th century archive photo research and 21st century satellite mapping.
So what does this all mean? The gentleman bum lived a life defined by his personal code of privacy and dignity, eventually dying unclaimed and buried anonymously in the almshouse cemetery. Yet, a century later, his very public notoriety led historians to track, map, and digitally locate the precise secrets he refused to share. Given that his fame was based on his mystery, if John Mead were alive today, would he appreciate the intense scrutiny, the use of technology like LIDAR and the GPS coordinates being published, or would he see it as the final, absolute violation of the independence he fought so hard to maintain?
The man who refused to bed is now a set of coordinates. It's a powerful thought. History always finds a way to reveal the secrets the past tried to keep.
Something to mull over as you contemplate your own relationship with privacy and the lasting power of a good story. We'll see you next time for the next deep dive.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Uncharted Lancaster Podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe and leave a rating or review wherever you listen. It really helps more people discover the show. For more fascinating local history, visit unchartedlancaster.com. And if you'd like to go deeper, check out one of Adam Zern's books at unchartedlancaster.com/books. Until next time, keep exploring.